Howdy, partner. Welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we are looking at our first real antique piece, the Merwin and Hulbert second model Frontier. You can tell that this is a Frontier model because of the flat butt on the gun. The Pocket Army model had a bird's head, crowned bird's head actually. Some people refer to that as the Skull Crusher. We're going to be talking a bit about both the first, second, and third models, primarily focusing on the first and second models as they are the most related to what we see here today. This is a gun that I will probably never be able to shoot, as ammunition for it is next to impossible to obtain. It's chambered in 44 Merwin. The second model was available in 44 Merwin or 44 Merwin and Hulbert, as well as 4440, also known as 44 Winchester, or on the guns it would have been marked, I believe it was caliber Winchester 1873. If I'm incorrect on that, I will post a little correction. But this is going to be our first true tabletop demo, because as I said, I have no real way to shoot this gun. So we're mostly just going to go over history and look at how it works, and at the end of the video do a little bit of speculation, because this gun has been modified. So I try not to speculate too much. I try to give you guys facts as much as I can present them, and that's going to be mostly what we're going to be focusing on here. But this gun has been modified, and it appears to be a modification that was done a very long time ago. And when I say a very long time ago, I mean 1880s, because these guns were the second model in particular was produced from 1878 until 1883. The first model was released in 1876, and production went up until 1878 when the second model was released. And we're going to look closer at some things on this gun to see there's one very tiny detail that is the easiest way to tell a first model from a second model, and it's a part that is kind of hidden. But yeah, they're very rare guns. This is about as Wild West as you can get, hence the cowboy hat and me saying howdy like an idiot at the beginning of the video. And they were considered one of the best revolvers of the Frontier era, though they got very little acclaim in their day. They actually applied for military contracts and never got them because they were considered at the time to just not be enough better than their competitors to be worth switching over to entirely. As such, not an awful lot were made. I've seen some estimates that less than 10,000 of each model exists. There's first, second, third, fourth models. Like I say, we're going to briefly touch on at least the first three, though the third model, I would like to actually own a third model someday and be able to really dive into the third and fourth models with the third model as an example, especially considering that's the gun that Jesse James carried, was a third model Frontier. So I mentioned modification on this. Notice that this has a fairly short barrel. These were originally released with a 7-inch long barrel. This barrel has been cut to something around 3.5 inches, and there were 3.5-inch barrels available. I believe in the second model it was only available for the Pocket Army, was what it was called, and that would have been with the bird's head, the crowned bird's head that I mentioned before. And it still wouldn't look quite like this. This piece here would be a little bit shorter than the actual barrel itself, and you can see cut marks on certain parts on the gun. I actually had my friend Jess take a look at this, and he happens to be a machinist. We actually mentioned him in the last video because we borrowed one of his guns, and he pointed out like there's some very clear cut marks, but it appears to have been done a very, very long time ago because of pitting and the patina on the spot where it was cut. And like I say, we'll look closer at that when we do a from the top view of this here in a couple of minutes. But first, we're going to go over the history a little bit. So, like I said, in 1876, Joseph Merwin came out and released the first model of the Merwin and Hulbert. He did this with the financial backing of the Hulbert brothers. The Hulbert brothers, they had a 50% share in the Hopkins and Allen Manufacturing Company. This is the company that made the guns. Their name is what was stamped all over the guns, and Later on, I'll show you where the stamps should be, but because of the very rough shape of the condition of this gun, the markings are only barely visible, and only in a couple places are they visible at all because of extreme pitting, with this gun being, you know, no newer than 137 years old, and it could be as old as 142 years old. So it's very, very old. This is the oldest piece in my collection to date, and it was a very cool find. I was very happy when I got my hands on it, especially once I started learning about it, because I'd already mentioned Jesse James carried a Merwin Hulbert, and so did Pat Garrett. So I don't actually know which model Pat Garrett carried specifically, but both of them carried Merwin Hulbert models. So let's dive right into the craziest thing about this gun. Ejection. Boom. If that ain't about the weirdest thing I've ever seen, I don't know what is. So the barrel, or the cylinder should follow the barrel out when I do that. It doesn't on this one, but what you do is you depress this, rotate, and this one seems to rotate a little farther than it should, again probably because of the modification and the age, but it should rotate 90 degrees, and then the whole assembly slide forward. The barrel or the cylinder should not be free as it is, and then the barrel shouldn't come off that easily. You should have to depress this button here. All of this comes off. You can see that this post is in pretty rough shape, but in good shape. This would actually be a tight enough machine fit to create a vacuum between the cylinder and the barrel and this rod here. Now, there you can see machining marks, and you can see on the end here, very barely, but it is there. You can see where this has been cut. It is a shame that this is the case. It definitely devalues the gun. Markings should be, and I'm going to use the absolute height of pointing technology here, a stick. Text is along the top here, and should be along here as well. Text here should be as seen there. Text here should be again as seen there. So, an interesting thing with this gun is loaded from the side through a gate here, and you see there's like a rim catcher here. The outside doesn't catch the rim of the bullet, but these were chambered in rimmed cartridges. When you pulled the gun apart, the rims of the cartridges would catch on that inner ring, and when you got out to the maximum extent, if it would stay in place, of which it is just not going to because it's being difficult, when it got out to its maximum extent, the loose casings would fall free, but unused bullets would stay in, as the bullet would be actually a little longer than what should be the maximum extent, of which should be about there. But again, this is all sorts of messed up. It appears that it may have been damaged severely here at one point. You can see these ribs. These should be very plain and obvious. This whole thing should be in the white. Yeah, so very cool piece. And one more thing while we've got it here. The distinguishing factor between a first and second model would be right inside here. There would be basically a doorway here on the first model. In the second model, the internals were simplified a bit, and they no longer needed this doorway to access anything. So that was deleted, and that is your most obvious difference. That, and if you see the gun marked as a 44 Winchester, of which would be marked on the side. I can't remember if it was on the left or right side, but it would be marked very plainly if it was chambered in the 44 Winchester, and if it was chambered in that, then it's definitely a second model, because the first models were not available in that. So, slap this guy back together real quick. Maybe put that on the right way. Boom. Grip is damaged on this gun. The right side grips are, replacement grips are available, but I don't know, these are the original grips, so I'll probably just keep them, especially since I won't be shooting this gun. So yeah, the second model of the Merwin Hulbert revolver was still being produced in 1879 when the founder of the company, Joseph Merwin, died. And this was a massive blow to the company. They never really financially recovered, and there was a list of reasons why. The revolvers themselves were never the problem, but up to this point they already had some financial woes. So they had invested a significant amount of money. I believe it was $100,000 in 1870s money was invested in the Evans Rifle Company, and that is a rifle that failed commercially, and that was a huge blow to the company. They tried to keep everything very diversified, and it helped for a long time until it didn't. And when it didn't, all came crashing down when Joseph Merwin died. Another thing that they did that came back to bite them in the backside was they had sent 3 large shipments of Merwin Hulbert revolvers to the Russian Empire that the Russian Empire never paid for. So between those, a couple other bad investments, and the death of the founder, the company was in serious trouble in the 1880s. However, by 1883, they released arguably one of the best revolvers of the Wild West, the Merwin Hulbert III model, of which the only immediate difference, and you'll see it right off the bat if you have an eye for this type of thing, is a top strap is added that connects the barrel to the frame above the cylinder. So the first and second models are open top revolvers, of which is a kind of something you don't see open top revolvers anymore. It's just a design concept that was thrown out once people realized how much stronger it is to attach across the top. And this was kind of a very unique bird in its time. There were definitely advantages, even with the earlier models. You can see just how close the cylinder is to the back of the frame here. Grime basically didn't get inside these guns when everything was a proper fit. Like I say, this is a example in what would be considered basically a pitiful condition, but in their original condition, these guns were a masterpiece. The vast majority of these revolvers came in a nickel-plated finish. You can see little bits of that remaining. This side is actually very poor. The other side has a little more of the finish remaining, but is a little more unsightly because of the broken grip, hence the reason I've been propping this with the unbroken side visible. And we just got a nifty little chunk of a deer skull here for our gun prop here. And yeah, this is one of the most interesting revolvers I've ever come across. If you guys haven't noticed by this point, I love revolvers. I currently own more revolvers than any other one type of gun, and you'll be seeing a lot more of them. I picked this one up along with a couple of other revolvers that are also antiques, one of which I might actually be able to fire. I don't know. We will see. Fingers crossed. But yeah, this was a very unexpected gun to have fallen in my lap. Not a gun that I really knew anything about initially, but I kind of went crazy on it. Watched every video, read every article I could find on the gun as soon as I became aware of what it was, because it is fascinating. People love, the Wild West. That's just something that, like for me, ever since childhood, I've been fairly obsessed with the Wild West and the frontier era that reached from, the Civil War basically until the First World War. And some of the revolvers that came out in that time period were very different. People were trying to create something new. So, like, something like this is in no way anything like a Schofield, which is in no way anything like any of the percussion cap revolvers that came before. And the progression of gun evolution from the 1860s and 70s until World War II really is a wild ride, and this is one of the weirder ones that I've come across. So, yeah. And if we were going to speculate a bit about the cutting of this barrel, as I'd mentioned, the Frontier model, which again, flat bottom, Frontier model, bird's head, Army model, or what was intended to be the Army model. They're referred to as a pocket Army. But the Frontier model only came in the first and second model, Merwin Hulbert's. The Frontier model was a 7-inch barrel, and this one has been cut. And there's a few reasons that could be. It might just be that the guy who bought it wanted a pocket Army and couldn't find one, so he had his local gunsmith cut it, or maybe he cut it himself. But it looks like it was well done. But the text on the top of the gun, as we looked at earlier, would continue past where that front sight blade actually is currently, and that front sight blade should be rounded, and it's not, and that's clearly because someone attached that after the fact. I have no way of knowing who did that. I've never seen one like that, so I don't know if that was the gun shop that did it, or the guy himself in his, barn or whatever decided to cut the gun. Potentially because he wanted to conceal it. And Americans have been obsessed with concealed weapons since pretty much the dawn of America, but in the frontier era, it wasn't as much of a concern because pretty much everybody just wore their gun on their hip. So if you were intending on having a large caliber gun, which was, this was a killer. The gun was meant to shoot a man and shoot him dead. For self-defense, but generally a law-abiding citizen would just carry it on their hip more likely than not. So it's very possible that the guy who got this gun intended to use it for nefarious purposes. Again, this is all speculation. This is not backed by science, really. This is my speculation. That's why I'm putting it at the end of the video here. But it's fascinating to consider what this gun was used for, and maybe who carried it. Was it, someone who was maybe a member of an outlaw gang who was intent on robbing a bank and didn't want them to know that he had this big honkin' 44 in his pocket? Who knows? There's no way to know for sure, but it's fun to play the guessing game. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This has been Thomas with Great Northwest Weaponry, and I'll see you next time.